We all face a monster storm at some point in our personal or professional lives. There's no escaping it. Could be divorce, could be financial hardship, could be medical emergency, could be a business bankruptcy, could be a crisis, a terrorist attack, could be anything. There's no escaping it. So the real question is, are you ready to handle that crisis, and how will you handle that crisis when it does confront you or your organization?
Welcome to the Treehouse studio and to Stumbling Blocks. My guest today is Jim Olson, former Chief Communications Officer at United Airlines, US Airways, Starbucks, and current Chief Communications Officer at Chorus International. He is also author of the book Tailwind, a compass for turning your setback story into your comeback legacy. Jim Olson, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
It's my pleasure. So Jim, you have a remarkable background. You've been head of communications at United Airlines, US Airlines, Starbucks. You've taught all over the world. You've lived and worked in more than 50 countries. You were head of communications at Starbucks when the Starbucks flagship store in Indonesia in Jakarta was bombed. You were head of communications at US Airways when the miracle on the Hudson happened with Captain Sully Sullenberger. You were head of communications at United Airlines when Dr. David Dow was removed from a flight and broke his nose and was bloody and was one of the first kind of viral moments in business history. And Oscar Munoz, who was CEO at the time, was a guest on the show not long ago. And so I'm going to ask you about that from your perspective, because I got his perspective. And so it's perhaps no wonder that you say things get worse before they get worse. But you also say that hopelessness is finite and hope is infinite, which is interesting because while your professional life is remarkable and you've been through kind of every kind of storm there is to go through from a professional communications perspective, on the personal side, you were diagnosed with lung cancer and then brain cancer. And then through the course of treatment for both of those, you lost your eyesight. And then you wrote a book called Tailwind. And in Tailwind is the quote I just mentioned, that hopelessness is finite, but hope is infinite. And so, Jim, if you don't mind, where I'd like to start is where Oscar Munoz left off when he was on the show, which is that moment about 10 years ago now, where Dr. David Dow was dragged off of a United flight. And what Oscar says is that he was prepped to sort of acknowledge the incident, but to say, hey, it wasn't actually a United flight. It was a partner of ours. And it wasn't actually United security guard. It was O'Hare security. And it wasn't us, essentially. It was someone else. And then he went on Good Morning America and he just apologized. And I wonder, that's his point of view. I'd love to hear the story from your point of view. Kind of what happened?
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm a huge fan of Oscar's. He hired me. I was his first executive hire after he came on board. He had his own medical crisis, as I'm sure you spoke to him about.
Heart attack in the middle, and heart replacement in the middle of being CEO. What was that like?
Yeah. Not only a massive heart attack, but a heart transplant, right? And then he bounced back to the guy could have easily just retired from that point, but he's a fighter, and more importantly, just cares about people and the organizations he works with. So I was honored to for him to bring me along his side and to be with them during that transformation of United that set the stage for it becoming the airline that it is today.
Absolutely,
it's the largest airline and very likely one of the most, if not the most admired airline in the world.
In the world, yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say, he talks a lot about his listening tour and how that shifted things at United. And I have to think that as his communications lead, you were part of the listening tour and probably orchestrated it, helped him go around the world and listen to folks all over the world at all kinds of crazy times and places. And so you should know that he speaks well of the work incredibly highly of the work that you did.
Yeah. And he wrote the foreword, as you
I saw, yeah.
He wrote the foreword to my book, which again I was blessed and honored to have him. He was the first person I went to because he was the perfect person to write that foreword, and now I understand why I went to him to write the foreword and why I'm so just blessed and thankful that he wrote the foreword, because it's more than a foreword. It's a foreword to the people reading the book, but to me it really is a it's a life ring that I read probably at least once a week. and that I know I'll read in the future when there are dark moments, because to me, it's more than a forward. It really is a life ring that continues to give me hope. Reading, he talked about his story and his comeback, that gives me hope and blue sky on my dark days.
I mean, I have to just pause and say you're being unbelievably modest here, and so I'm going to gloat on you for you. Your forward is a true who's who of the business community, but they're not just sort of generic forwards like read this book, it'll change your life. They're like really specific nuggets, like I lovingly recommend this book to friends, family, and colleagues, and anyone who believes in the power of personal transformation. That's from Howard Schultz, founder of Starbucks. Ariana Huffington writes in a forward. Sully Sullenberger, Oscar Munoz at United, Poppy Harlow from CNN, Chris Carr, the chairman of the board of REI, and on and on and on and on. So you're being modest, but I'm going to just name some of those names for you. It's really quite remarkable.
Yeah, and certainly don't want to divert from your question here, because number one rule of PR is actually to take the questions head on, as Oscar and I did. But look, the Dr. Dow situation was extremely unfortunate. Should have never happened, and we made sure that in the policy changes we made in the days that followed, that it hasn't happened again. And it's been almost probably 10 years since that happened. And so, it was the first time anything like that had ever happened as far as we knew. So in many ways, we were the guinea pigs, for that kind of scenario. There was no blueprint for dealing with that kind of scenario. That's certainly not an excuse by any means for, what happened. And, but it's like what I write about. When you're in these crises, whether it's a terrorist attack at our store in Jakarta, Indonesia, whether it's the Sullenberger situation, you can't anticipate so many of these situations. A plane landing on the Hudson River, ISIS deciding to bomb your store in Jakarta, and somebody being forcibly removed against their will, not by our own employees, but by rogue police officers, Chicago police officers.
Right.
That still doesn't excuse it. But what I found in my crisis communication experience, even in the US Airways situation on the Hudson River, the Jakarta situation we can talk about, and certainly in this case, in 99% of the cases, the first information coming in, it's a fog of war. There is information coming in from so many different sources in these situations. And so certainly in that situation with Dr. Dow, it was a Sunday night when it happened, late Sunday night. And so as you can imagine, that night and the morning that followed, there's information coming in from our own operations, from the airport, from the police department, from the authorities, from the media, from social media. And so you're trying to process all of this information. I'm not using this by any means as an excuse for the lack of, our initial response, which was not full-throated enough by any means. But I'm just trying to paint a picture for folks to understand.
Absolutely. That's what I wanted. Yeah.
There are so many armchair quarterbacks out there, and so I'm always very careful. You'll never see me quoted in any of the trades casting stones at any crisis, because unless you're in the room, you really don't know what's going on. Doesn't mean the decisions were right or wrong. It's just
Sure.
I find it very disingenuous when there are these PR agency crisis leads who've never actually sat in a boardroom before and faced a crisis, yet they're these experts all of a sudden on how to handle it. But that said, we missed the mark, and Oscar told you that, and he's said that many times. Because the initial information was painting a different picture than reality. And the lesson I learned from that, and I think Oscar probably shared this with you as well, is that once the toothpaste is out, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube very easily. And so the mistake that not only we made, but others make some of these situations, is a rush to get a statement out and explain what happened or cast blame before the dust settles and you really have all the information. Like I said, most of the information in most crises is wrong the first time around, and that was certainly the case here. But once you get that initial statement out, again, if you don't say if it's wrong or off the mark, you really can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. And so the lesson we all learned, including Oscar here, is that you can certainly acknowledge something. You can acknowledge how horrific something is without accepting responsibility or casting blame, and then noting that you'll get back with a more detailed explanation of what happened once you have all the facts. We just jumped to some conclusions that unfortunately were wrong. And but as Oscar did, we once we realized what had actually happened, we were very quick within the first 24, 48 hours to pivot to a much more full-throated apology. I think Oscar's words were, "We can't apologize enough for what happened," and we are going to take the next 7 days to do an autopsy on our policies and our procedures to make sure this never happens again. And we did exactly that. We bunkered down. We didn't put our tail between our legs and just, send in letters of resignation. We actually dug in for a week and looked at all the video camera footage, and we came out with, you can Google, it's out there. It was a public document. We came out with a PDF that was a 10-point, not only an explanation of what happened, but also a 10-point plan for the policy changes we were going to make sure this never happened again, and make sure if there were things that happened, the accommodations that we would provide to customers when things do go wrong.
So take us, if you don't mind, just sort of to that moment when you're in the studio, I guess maybe in a conference room at United's headquarters. Good Morning America is there. They brought in some of their high-powered talent. He's asked the question, sort of essentially, how did this happen? And then he flips the script and says it should have never happened and it'll never happen again, and I'm sorry. What was that moment like for you as one of his advisors? Like, take us to that moment.
Yeah, well, we all realized going into that, all of us that were advising him going into that, especially Oscar, give Oscar full credit. He was the one kind of going into that conversation the night before and that morning saying, we've got to, own this. Right. And he did exactly that. So that was, it was a very genuine, authentic, raw moment. But and I give Oscar full credit. He leads, and he realized, and we all realized that we had to. This wasn't about just flipping the script or coming up with new talking points. We had to own the situation, and he did exactly that. And he stepped up and did it, and he's a great example to other CEOs in terms of not hiding from the issue. I write about this in the book. Like, I think you've got to ride your storms and not try to run from them or hide from them. Right. At the end of the day, our lives and our reputation are going to be judged not by the number of storms that we avoid or the number of storms or how fast we go through a storm, but by the magnitude of the storms we do actually ride and go through and what we learn from them.
So take us to, if you don't mind, another storm. And again, this is one of the things that you write about in the book. And just for the listener, I will put in the show notes a link to the Oscar Munoz interview, so you can hear, as Jim just said, how genuine he was when he apologized, and how authentic it sounded and felt. And because it was from sort of the bottom of who he was, and came from a place of deeply rooted values. And I think
I'd add one more thing there. About apologizing, and this is why he also mentioned, I think, in that interview, was that it actions speak louder than words, and that was actually the title of that PDF or that report or that autopsy, whatever you want to call it, that we put out. That actions speak louder than words, and I think he even used language in his interview that day. And so, again, that's another, I think, mistake that a lot of organizations make. They could learn from this experience, right? Is that you can apologize all day long, but you've got to have actions that ultimately back up. There's got to be some kind of change that takes place, and we realized that we were honest enough at United, and Oscar certainly led the charge here. We can't just apologize. We've got to make actually fundamental changes. He used to say that our policies got in the way of our values, and so we could never let that happen again. So we had to change the policies that got in the way of our values.
Yeah, one of the things he says in the discussion we had is, "Show me your proof, not your promises," and it echoes exactly what you said. And gosh, his leadership has changed me a lot as I've watched and learned. So another storm that you helped lead through was, of course, the US Airways miracle on the Hudson. The piece of this that I want to ask you about, because we all know that remarkable story of Captain Sully Sullenberger landing the plane on the Hudson and saving every single life. But there's a piece that is specific to you that I think is really interesting. Um, you focused on the 3 flight attendants who got everyone out of the sinking plane, and you found their story and you pitched it to the New York Times as an example of heroism when everybody was focusing on Sully Sullenberger. And I wonder if you can tell us their story.
Yeah. So again, full credit to Sully and Jeff Skiles, who was his first officer, for ensuring that the aircraft and all, amazingly, all 155 souls on board that plane literally walked away. Some swam away from that situation. And that's, we used to joke that we at US Airways that we had a crisis plan, but we didn't have a miracle plan. And which was really the case. And it really was a team effort. I mean, it was, we had actually I'd only been there 8 months and had never worked for an airline before. And so actually about a month before that situation, we actually did a full tabletop cross-functional crisis exam or exercise. And so the accident happened a month later. So we were ready to jump in the foxhole and handle that situation. But to your question, really communications and leadership is a team sport. And Sully and Jeff Skiles did their job. They got the plane safely on the Hudson River. But the flight attendants, the 3 that were in the back, they did their job. They made sure that the 150 passengers that were aboard that flight that day safely were evacuated. And it wasn't as simple as you might think it would be. If you look at the pictures of that aircraft, it landed without wheels on the river, which is like landing on a cement runway at Newark without wheels. And so,
is that right? That's the comparison.
Yeah, it was coming in. It was coming in fast and hot, and and so the reason you see people out on the wings and the front of the aircraft, not the back, is because a huge hole was ripped in the back. And so if you had actually been on that aircraft, there was water, up to the seat tops, cold water. It was January. I mean, there was 32 degrees. Yes. And so Doreen Welsh, who was the flight attendant in the back, so they had 2 in the jump seats in the front of the plane. It was an Airbus and 1 in the back. She, all 3 are heroes in their own right, but she really was above and beyond because she had gashes in her legs from where the floor had ripped up in front of her, water, freezing water coming in and splashing in her face. And she's pushing people forward. Even though a passenger tried to open the back door, she's like, don't open it. If they'd opened that back door, it would have just flooded the plane and it would have just sank even faster. So she was pushing people forward and got people off the wings. And so we just, and certainly that concept of recognizing the flight attendants, Elise Eberwein, who was my boss, who was the overall head of HR and public affairs, we really sat down and we were like, okay, Sully is, he's writing a book and doing all this great stuff, but really, there are these unsung heroes to this story that are certainly worthy of the spotlight. And so it's a great example of storytelling, right? Like we always want to, race when we tell stories to the hero. Yeah. And really, in many cases, it's the unsung heroes that are the more interesting, the more interesting stories. If you think about the movies you like and the books you read, it's often not the obvious hero. It's obvious in many cases the unexpected hero or heroes or heroines in these stories. And there are just so many examples of movies out there where it's not the person that you would expect to be the hero of the story that are the real heroes.
Who are the unsung heroes in your life?
Yes. In my case, and I have a whole section. My wife actually gave me a hard time because my acknowledgement section of my book is more than just a couple of pages. But I decided in my book, rather than just like giving typical tributes to family members, I actually wrote what I called love letters to my family. Mm-hmm. So I consider my wife and my daughter, my mother, my father, who had passed away literally a couple weeks before I was diagnosed with cancer, who taught me so much, and my sister. They're the ultimate heroes in my life who have gotten me through so much. And so I felt it was just unworthy to write this book and just simply give them a couple of sentences. So I I actually wrote entire letters to my immediate family members, my late father. But then beyond them, I had an entire team of doctors who've gotten me through all these situations. And so Dr. Pachipala, who was my chief oncologist, Dr. Jason Burligan, who is my radiologist, oncologist, Dr. Effendi, who was my brain surgeon, and all of their nurses. And I mean, there were almost too many people to even name in the book. There was an entire ecosystem. There was an army of individuals who have and continue to make sure that I stay alive and stay well.
Yeah, as you said, your acknowledgement section is I've never seen an acknowledgement section with that names so many specific people and what they did, and so it's and these love letters with things like, "Thank you for bringing me into this world. Thank you for helping explain the world to me. Thank you for showing me the world, for listening to me." In the letter to your mom, it's incredible. So I want to flip to, as you just began talking about cancer. And so can you take us to the moment when you learned that you had lung cancer?
Yeah. And just for the record, I actually have melanoma cancer, but it had appeared on my lung and my brain. So just technically, even though cancer, it was melanoma, which is very rare. It was very surprising. Well, the part that it was melanoma was not overly surprising, just because I have spent a lot of time in the sun. I, went to high school in Los Angeles and spent a lot of time on the beach, and have traveled a lot around the world. And we lived before my diagnosis, we lived on the remote Indian Ocean island of Mauritius, where I was an executive resident at the university there. So on the one hand, it doesn't surprise me that I had melanoma. I didn't want it, but it wasn't overly shocking. What was the surprise was that I didn't have any of the normal spots that you associate with melanoma. You see,
like
which
spots
is
on your skin.
All the public service announcements are, if you have these ugly spots, go to your dermatologist. I would go for regular dermatology checks and annual physicals, and there were never any spots noted. What got me into that initial diagnosis was it was a Friday night in late November, right before Thanksgiving. And my wife was off visiting with friends. My daughter was at college. I was home alone, went out for a nice dinner, got home, 10 o'clock at night, was in bed. And I just, by about 2 o'clock in the morning, I was awakened to this just horrific lower back pain. I'd had soreness in the back, but nothing like this. It was like an electric screwdriver just drilling into my lower back. Not my lung, not my brain. It was just like in my lower back, a drill going in. I took some Advil. That didn't help. And that's actually a blessing that it didn't help. And it was too late to go to just urgent care. So I drove myself. So I actually heard Oscar's voice actually echoing in the back of my head, because he had his own public service announcement that if you ever feel anything wrong, you'll know it. And don't hesitate to call 911 or go to the ER, because if you're afraid that it's nothing and you'll get laughed at, if it is really something and you die, you'll regret not having called the ER. So I actually, instead of calling 911, I actually stirred up the energy. There was a hospital nearby, so I drove. It was like 5 minutes away. Get to the ER, flop on the desk at 2 o'clock in the morning. Luckily, in the woodlands of outside a suburb of Houston, nothing's going on there. So I was literally the only person. And so they triage me and take me back to a suite, and I'm laying there, and they give me some morphine, which I'd never had before, which now I know why it's so addictive. And they use it in the military so much, because it actually did that. The pain went away in my lower back almost instantaneously, which was great. But the doctor said, hey, we still need to figure out what brought you in here to begin with. So they did some blood work and a CT scan of my lower abdomen and lower back. And ERs take a long time. So I just kind of sat there listening to music for a couple hours as the morphine did its thing, which was kind of a nice, magic carpet ride in itself. And then the doctor comes back in and he says, I got some good news and some bad news, Jim. He goes, the good news is that your blood work and the CT scan didn't show anything abnormal with your lower back or your organs in your abdominal area, or your blood work came back great. I said, so what's the bad news? And he said, well, the CT scan, and he goes, this was totally accidental. The aperture of the CT actually caught your lower middle lung, and there's a 2.5-inch spot on your lung. And I said, well, why do I have this pain in the lower back? He goes, I can't provide any explanation for why I have no connection between the lung and the lower back, but the good news is it got you in here. You're released to go home, but I strongly suggest you go see a pulmonologist ASAP to get that checked out. And I'm not a smoker; I'm a runner, and I thought like I can't have lung cancer. I'm in great health, and then they started doing the thread came out of the sweater at that point, coinciding with my dad passing away, and in early January went in for the diagnosis after the biopsy, and was sitting Dr. Pachipala at my oncologist office, who I'd never met before, and he goes, "You have stage 4 melanoma."
Unbelievable. And so you begin treatment, and then what happens?
Yeah. So the good news, so the bad news is that I heard stage 4 and my life just went into slow motion. I mean, I just thought I thought that was it. I thought he was going to say, just start getting your, everything in order kind of thing, right? Like stage 4 is just, they're words you never want to hear. And then I also started thinking, okay, on the treatment side, it's going to be chemo, and I'm just my whole life just at that point, I saw my life just disappear in front of my eyes. Not just my career, just my life. And the good news is Dr. Pachipala, and timing is everything. He said, the good news is that there's this new treatment. We're not going to use chemo. We're going to use immunotherapy, which these aren't his words, but mine. But like, this was kind of the metaphor. Chemotherapy is like a 20th century nuclear bomb. You drop it on your body and it kills everything, good and the bad cells. That's why people have such a horrible reaction to it. Immunotherapy is kind of almost like AI created. It was just approved by the FDA in 2018, 2019, and it's very highly targeted. It just, you get it the same way through an infusion, but it just goes after the bad cells, not the good cells. So you don't have anywhere near the kinds of experiences. And so he said, we're going to treat this with immunotherapy. He goes, I've got a 95% success rate with my patients that are in your exact same condition. You're in great shape. And so I have every, bit of optimism that you're going to come out of this thing in a year to a year and a half, free of this thing. I can't promise you that, but that's my diagnosis. And he goes, and as we were getting relieved, my wife was there with me, Stephanie, and we were walking. And he goes, oh, one more thing, just out of abundance of caution, we should do a brain MRI just to make sure it hasn't spread to your brain. I don't think that's probably happened, but just to be safe. And so a week later, we started my immunotherapy treatment, and he walks in during the treatment. He goes, how's the treatment going? And I said, oh, it feels like a placebo. It was nothing. He goes, and then his smile kind of disappeared real quick. And he goes, well, your brain MRI came back and you've got an 1.5 inch tumor on your brain. And I thought, there you go. It gets worse before it gets worse.
Yeah.
And so
what was that? Yeah. What was that? And what did that feel like? What was that like to get that news?
Oh, well, at that point, I if I thought a melanoma stage 4 diagnosis was bad, this was, like I said, it gets worse. This was, it didn't get any worse. I thought I didn't want to think. I thought, well, at that point, how could it get, worse than this? And I had all these fears of brain surgery and all kinds of different things. And he said, I'm going to refer you to my partner in my practice, who's our radiology oncologist, who's a great guy who I stay in touch with to this day. And he alleviated me of all my fears and said, look, we're going to blast this thing out of your brain with 1 5-minute dose of radiation. And I said, well, is it going to burn a hole in my head? I lose all my hair? Am I going to what's going to happen? He goes, no. He goes, you just lay down. We have to get this really cool mask made. And then we'll bolt you down for 5 minutes. You'll listen to some really cool music, and they'll just, it'll be like you're watching a Star Wars show for 5 minutes. And this little goober will be blasted away, and we'll do another MRI in about 3 months to make sure it's all gone. And that was the case. 3 months later, he was right. He goes, it's a 10. It's, it's gone. There's a little bit of spattering of residual. It's kind of like pouring acid on a body in The Sopranos, right? Like, there's still some ashes and stuff left over.
There's still some gruel left over, but not much.
Yeah, which there's a little bit downstream story from that that did result in some brain surgery, but that for all intents and purposes, that the cancer was, gone. And it's been gone to this day.
But then what happened?
So then, so then I made the mistake, it was Father's Day. So this is about probably 6 months into my diagnosis and treatment. So it's Father's Day. So my daughter and I decided to go get a Do Hard Things tattoo on my right shoulder. I'm a huge fan of JFK's moonshot, Man on the Moon speech at Rice University, and the Do Hard Things attitude. And I thought, my lung tumor with the immunotherapy had shrunk about 60 or 70% by that point. The brain tumor is gone. I thought I was just this dragon slayer gladiator who just kicked cancer to the curb. And so I got this do hard things tattoo on my shoulder. And that was like, I guess, mistake number one. And about a month later, I was on a business trip. At that point, I was still working at at the airline. I was out there. I never took a day off during this whole period. I was just,
sorry, I'm just pause there for a second. You had lung cancer and then brain cancer, and you did not take a day off.
No, I took one day off because I woke up just one day on a business trip to Connecticut where woke up just kind of fatigued, and that went away within probably 6 hours. But I did not. But even then, I was on a business trip, so I didn't really even take the day off. I was working, but I didn't take a single day off. Was flying around the country doing what I do as a new airline, just PR exec, just cutting ribbons and meeting with mayors and governors and doing all this stuff. And but then in June, that all changed real fast. After I got that do hard things tattoo. So that's lesson number one for your listeners is don't get a do hard things tattoo unless you really. And so I was on a business trip out to California in the Napa Valley area, and it was the 4th of July, and I'd been out at the airport. Our leadership team would fan out on big holidays to do hot dogs, hamburgers, and I was ordering my Uber that afternoon on the 4th to go back to my hotel, and then I was going to do some wine tasting. And I looked at my phone, and everything is just, it's like looking at a video. Everything's starting to get all pixelated and blurry, and I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what it was. And I thought, well, maybe I had already wore contacts. I mean, I could drive. I had pretty good vision with my contacts and stuff, but I couldn't. But it definitely, something was wrong. And I called my eye doctor, just who does my contacts and normal glasses. And she ran through some diagnostics the next morning with me and said, I don't think anything's really wrong with you. She goes, just get some rest and come see me on Monday when you get back to Houston. But then the next morning when I did wake up, I looked in the mirror, and it just again, it's kind of like how I see you now. It's almost like if you wear glasses, for any of you that are watching or listening, and you get dilation drops put in your eyes. It's just that it's not complete darkness and blindness in that sense. It's just this almost this kind of screen of just blurriness and fogness that kind of overlays your vision. And so, long story short, it took about 6 weeks to figure it out after going to about 6 different doctors. But they ultimately diagnosed as optic nerve damage, which I'd never even heard of before. But it's the cords it's not your eyes themselves; it's the cords that go from your eyes to your brain. And there's lots of things that can cause optic nerve damage, but in my case, they're not sure. So I don't want to scare anyone off from immunotherapy. But one of the side effects of immunotherapy can be dramatic swings in blood pressure, either high or low. And so they think that I might have had like a micro seizure in the middle of the night before, that I didn't even notice. And that then cut off the blood or oxygen flow to the optic nerves, that then led to this basically irreversible vision damage that's rendered me legally blind. So I can't drive. I can kind of see you. The only way I can describe it is like, again, if you want to experience what I'm experiencing, go to an eye doctor, have them put in a double dose of dilation drops, and you'll know what Jim Olson sees.
So, dilation drops that never go away and they never fade.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I'm so sorry that happened. I'm going to read some of the things that you've written since this life experience. You wrote, cancer did not make me weaker. It made me stronger. Blindness did not make my world darker. It made my world brighter. And then separately you wrote, I lost my sight, but I found my purpose. What do those mean, and how did you find the hope to write them?
Yeah, well, like I said, I never took a day off before I had the vision loss. So I was still fighting the cancer battle. But I... when the vision loss happened, that threw my world into a little nosedive or tailspin emotionally and physically. So I did actually, about probably 3 weeks into that, I tried to muscle through it, and it was just too hard trying to do everything I was doing at my job with this vision loss. And so that's where I did call Andrew Levy, who is the CV, and he still is the CEO of Avella, who actually previously had worked with Oscar. He was the CFO at United Airlines. So
that's amazing. Oscar is a talent magnet. I love it.
Yes.
It's amazing.
So several of us, after we left United, followed Andrew over to Avella Airlines. But I felt like an injured football player. I called Andrew and said, Coach, I need to side. He didn't come to me. He didn't say, Jim, you need to pull yourself out of the game. I went to him and said, Andrew, I need to bench myself. And so that's what short-term disability is there for. I never thought in my life, I'd always heard about it in HR presentations about your benefits. And I thought, I'll never have to, like, who uses short-term disability, right?
Yeah, you hear about it on your first day during orientation, and that's usually it.
Yeah, and so I'm glad it's there. I used that, and I took 3 months. And when you're on short-term disability legally, not that I would have loved to have had stuff to work on, but legally, just they can't give you anything to work. Even though I called in and said, hey, can I help you with something? They're like, no, you can't do anything. So that's what led to the book. I would go on my walks every morning to Starbucks. I'd go on these 3-mile walks, come back because I couldn't drive. So I'd come back with a Starbucks in hand and sit down at my computer and was doing journaling. And my wife and daughter said, you've always wanted to write a book. You got 3 months with nothing to do. Why don't you write your book? And so, so the journaling kind of started to turn into ideation. And so I actually have a whole chapter in the book that actually gives people a formula for how to write a book. If you want to write a book, like it gives you a step by, or I don't know if it's the right model for writing a book, but it was the model I followed for writing a book. I certainly hope you don't have to write a book under my circumstances, but if you want to write a book, it's certainly a doable thing. And so I took those 3 months and I wrote 300 pages. Now what I would do is, but that taught me how, taking that time by writing the book, it allowed me from an occupational therapy standpoint to learn how to use the accessibility tools on the Mac. So how to use keyboard commands to zoom in and zoom out, how to use Siri to read back things to me very quickly, how to use dictation to dictate things. And so I was constantly going through this ebb and flow of maybe typing things and then having Siri read stuff back to me, or dictating to my phone on these walks some ideas and then getting back. And so I had this whole kind of, I use like all these different resources to ultimately write the book, which is, right here, Tailwind. But I got the first draft done, and then I went back to work. I came up to the end of the 3 months, and Andrew called and said, are you going to come back? And I said, absolutely. I figured out how to manage through this. And emotionally, I'd learned how to deal with what I was doing because I felt the confidence now. I knew how to, do what I needed to do my job. And I went back and was back full force, traveling around the country, doing ribbon cuttings and doing everything I was doing before. And then ultimately I had people starting to call me saying, like, Jim, are you ever going to finish your book? And I had to put the book on hold. I couldn't, it was just very hard to finish, like to do all the editing. And I, ultimately, about probably 4.5 years into, nearly 5 years into my Avello journey, I left and spent this past year doing all the fit and finish on the book and the cover design and all that kind of stuff.
Well, the book is well worth reading. I mean, it's your story is extraordinary, but I still wonder, like, this phrase that you said, I lost my sight, but I found my purpose. Like, what does that mean? Yeah,
well, it's good. Well, the writing of the book really did kind of help me clarify. I think I always kind of knew this, but it kind of forced me, because if I was going to write a book, and this is not a memoir, as you know, the book it's got my story in it, but it's also got the stories of, like, I don't know, 15 other friends.
Yeah, lots of other people
in there. Most of the people that I mentioned in the book are that have stories in there are people I know directly that are first friends. There's just one person that has a story in the book that's a friend of a friend. The boxer, Daniel Jacobs, who was the middleweight boxing champion of the world, who had his own spinal cancer comeback story. But other than that, they're all like direct friends. And so, for me, as I was writing the book, I couldn't be writing a book about kind of discovering your purpose and not actually be honest about what mine was. And so hopefully my personal mission statement is that my calling is to help others discover and answer their calling. And the book became kind of the manifestation of that mission. And so the book in many ways is my personal calling or purpose coming to life.
So in the book, you talk about finding your sense of purpose. You say, ambition without purpose is like a sailboat without a compass. And then you get even more interesting. You say the fruits of our ambition may bring us happiness, but it's purpose that gives our life meaning. Which is kind of interesting coming from someone who's had a career as successful as yours. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, look, I've had these amazing jobs that where I've gotten to fly, discover the world, and I've been, like I said, I still have to conquer Antarctica, but I've been to all sorts of
That I have no doubt you will.
And had these amazing experiences. I've worked for very purpose oriented and driven organizations and leaders, and have led a very happy life. But but really, it takes, sometimes it takes a crisis for you to really realize, your purpose on this planet, and what you can really, the lives that you can really change and help. And not that I wasn't helping people before. It wasn't like I was working for Philip Morris, peddling cigarettes and taking people's lives. But I was very selective. The companies I've worked for, as you see from my resume, these are all purpose-driven organizations and leaders I've worked for, to various degrees. And even Oscar is an extremely purpose-driven leader. I mean, he writes about in my, and he might have talked about this in your interview, but he talks about in the forward about, when he woke up from his heart transplant and the nurse telling him, hey, Oscar, I see two kinds of patients come through the ICU, but they both ask the same question. The first group ask, why me? Why, God, did you impose this horrific medical tragedy upon me? There are so many others that are worthy of this, life-destroying illness than me. And then the other group come in and ask, why me? And they say, God, why did you give me a second shot at life? Why did you bless me, with this opportunity to be a beacon of hope and inspiration for other people? And Oscar told the nurse, I'm determined to be that second kind of person. And when I read that, I'd never heard Oscar tell that story before he wrote it in my forward. And I read that and I thought, well, I've got to be that second kind of person too. And so it's a good question to ask yourself, why me? And, how are you going to answer that question?
Yeah. Or sort of the other way of phrasing it that maybe you haven't said explicitly is, why not me?
Exactly. And that could be any, that's why I wrote this first sentence of the book, of the main portion of the book is, we all face a monster storm at some point in our personal or professional lives. There's no escaping it. You're going to, whether it's something that happens to you at work or in your personal life or in your professional life or both, could be divorce, could be, financial hardship, could be medical emergency, could be a business bankruptcy, could be a crisis, a terrorist attack, could be anything. There's really, there's no escaping it. So the real question is, are you ready to handle that crisis, and how will you handle that crisis when it does confront you or your organization?
One of the things you say is that if telling your story doesn't scare you, you're not revealing enough. You're not being real enough. And there are two chapters in your book, and I just want to read their names because they're great. One is, don't let your story go to waste. And then the very next one is 5 reasons not to tell your story, which I love. But again, you write, if telling your story doesn't scare you, you're not revealing enough because you're not being real enough. What does that mean? And how does it, sort of in your life, what did it mean?
Well, I was very lucky, and I actually write about this, and especially in the gratitude section of my book. I was very lucky to have some amazing storytellers surrounding me and other people that I really trust. And I write this in kind of my formula for writing a book: go find some people to really kind of push you to be very real and raw and revealing in your story. And so I use that test, right? Like, there are some things that you have to be vulnerable, and it's one thing to say you're scared, but you really, if you really want your story to connect with other people and be relatable, you just really have to go deep and hard. And if you're not willing to go there, it's not so much that you shouldn't tell your story, but if you really want to truly connect with other people, you've got to, I think you've got to go deep. And the best way to do that is to have a trusted, I call it my writer's room, like to have a trusted group of people who you give license to push you, and you send them chapters, and they, and they'll tell you, hey, Jim, this is great, but what do you mean by X, Y, or Z? Like, tell me more about that. And once you answer that tell me more question, then all of a sudden that adds another whole page to the chapter. And then you start to get deeper right there. And then they'll even push you further. Okay, that's great, Jim, but tell me more about that. So next thing you know, a 5-page chapter turns into a 10-page chapter real fast, because you've got some of these people really pushing you to to explain why you said a certain thing. And that's really how you get to that vulnerability. Because sometimes your mind just, we're wired to be very protective of ourselves. And sometimes our own mind won't even let us ask the questions that really need to get asked, because it's just our own survival instinct blocks out these experiences. It sometimes takes a third party to come in and ask you these questions.
In your book, throughout your book, throughout, but especially in the beginning and at the end, in the acknowledgments before you start writing love letters to the folks who are near to you, really your first love letter is a letter of gratitude to God, thanking him for the chance to be alive, thanking him for the chance of a remarkable life, with, as you write, with brimming with adventure, friendship, joy, love, and good health for most of my years. Can you tell us a little bit about how faith has shaped you?
Yeah. Well, like I said, faith has been a huge part of this. There are absolutely, in my mind, miracles that have happened. You can call them whatever you want. But even dating back to that, that pain in my lower back that took me into the hospital without any spots on my skin for melanoma. If I had, that was a life ring from God to get into the hospital. Because otherwise I would not have gone to the hospital. And if I'd probably waited another 6 months to go in, by the time I was having a hard time breathing or pains in my head from the brain tumor, I probably wouldn't be here talking to you right now. And so I've talked to so many different doctors, and I always ask them, what was the connection between the lower back pain and the melanoma? And every single doctor has not found a connection between the two. Maybe it was totally coincidental, but coincidence is sometimes just a miracle in itself. So
yeah.
I'm convinced that that was a shaking of the shoulders in the middle of the night to get my ass into the hospital, and for whatever reason. And you have, a lot of times I write about this in the book, I would find myself just, especially after the vision loss, just kind of sinking into my sheets at night or in the morning, and just life is just a blur. And I use this phrase, like, you wake up with this choice of either giving up or getting up.
Yeah.
And I would just, even though sometimes it was really hard, again, not a single morning where I just found myself just sinking into the sheets permanently for the whole day or for the whole week. Might take me half an hour to, summon the courage to get out of bed. But I attribute a lot that to faith, to, Oscar's, why me? It's not really a opportunity. It's in my view, I view it really as a almost obligation to get up and share my story every day.
Last question for you. You say, one of the things you say in your book is, too often we beg God for things he's already making happen. And you wrote that mid-radiation. Can you tell us about that moment?
Yeah. I found myself praying a lot and begging for, whether it be early on with my cancer diagnosis, that, that I survive and that these tumors go away. And I ultimately kind of came to the, I guess kind of the illumination that, in many ways, while I've been doing this praying, the miraculous, masterful work of healing is actually already going on. And so what I've kind of trained myself and kind of oriented myself is to, rather than praying every night even for my vision to this day, it's not so much like I pray that my vision comes back, but rather it's a prayer of gratitude every night that you're already working on restoring my vision.
Unbelievable. Jim, thank you so much. I've learned a great deal from you, both now and then from your writings in your book. Thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan.